Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today I have for you a review of the Aurorus Australis closed back dynamic driver headphone that comes in at $900 US. A few weeks ago, a rep from Aurorus Audio reached out to me and asked if I would like to review their Borealis and this headphone, and I said sure, I would love to do that. Aurorus Audio explicitly gave me free rein to be as positive or as negative as I deemed appropriate when I reviewed their products, including this one, and I had some email correspondence with them just asking some technical questions, but otherwise they have made no attempt to influence my opinion on this piece or any other, and so all of the thoughts you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. So let's go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, and we'll come back on the other side and dig into the Australis.
Hi, I'm Wave Theory's human companion, and he wants you to know that your support of this YouTube channel helps keep the reviews coming. If you enjoy Wave Theory's honest, thorough style, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the links in the description below to sign up for the Patreon or send him a tip through PayPal. All right, enjoy the musings.
All right, so as I stated in the intro, this is a $900 US closed back with dynamic drivers. The specs on this thing is that those drivers are 32 ohm in impedance, but no sensitivity rating was given on Aurorus's website. But they are easy driving. If I had to guess, just given what I've listened to here over the course of doing this channel, is that the sensitivity here is probably somewhere in the upper 90s, maybe into the low hundreds of dB per milliwatt. So these are pretty easy to drive. It does not take a whole lot of power to really get them to sing. So keep that in mind, which is good for a closed back when you might be considering using a closed back in some situations where you don't always have access to super high powered amps. Okay, fits the bill quite nicely there. So this is my second Aurorus Audio review. As I mentioned earlier, I also did the Borealis, which is right there, and so I will put a link down to my Borealis review there in the description below. And so we'll dig further into this one. It's interesting because this is the closed back version of the Borealis, basically, is my understanding. And as you see from the build here, like, it looks almost identical to its open back sibling, save for the fact that it in fact is closed back. It has a full closing on the cup here. Looks to me like we have some sort of plastic or other polycarbonate material here that could very well be 3D printed. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, doesn't really matter. That fits over the back here and makes that kind of a sound when you knock on it. And despite being closed back here, the weight is pretty reasonable here. So it's not a particularly heavy headphone or anything like that. But just like the Borealis, it's got this like kind of Dan Clark Audio style like tension bands or whatever you call these things up here. It's got this Velcroed on comfort pad that goes over top the suspension strap part, and the suspension strap, don't know how well you can see this, just the material and the way that it's made and all that, looks like it was cut directly out of a car from the seatbelt. Okay, but it works. Okay, then we have these sliders here for the head size adjustment, right? And this one is not quite as well tensioned as the Bori was in that way, but I think probably tightening these screws down will tighten that up. I just haven't gotten around to doing that. But otherwise, like, same, whoop, come on. That strap is a little floppy there, but otherwise we have, fairly smooth motion here. It does catch a little bit on the gimbals here in this motion, but then we have plenty of rotation this way, all of that. So it's fairly well made product overall, and it's fairly comfortable. Again, not super heavy. Okay, and it distributes what weight there is on the head well, so I didn't really have any kind of pain or fatigue, anything like wearing that. Similar to the Bori though, it does not clamp very hard. So like if you are working at a desk and you need to look down, like I feel it slipping forward. on my head when I do that. So it does wiggle around quite a bit as you move around, which again, because of where we might want to use closed backs, that can become kind of a bigger issue, I think, because closed back, you might be in like an office setting in a cubicle where you might be looking down at a desk or something like that, moving your head around a lot. It will slide around a bit. So even though it's easy to drive and it's closed back, if we talk about use cases here a little bit, I would not call it an OTG or even a transportable friendly headphone, because it is big and bulky. It doesn't, I mean, it's big and bulky, but not necessarily heavy. It just has some large dimension to it. And then of course it's got a, takes up a fair amount of space with this whole headband system, and because of the very light clamp, again, doesn't stay on the head well. So I don't think it's mobile or transportable friendly as a closed back. It's really more of like a take this to an office and leave it there and use it there kind of a thing, I think, in terms of the way that it's built and the way that it fits on the head and that sort of thing. So that is something to keep in mind if you are in the market. And so that also brings up questions about sound isolation, like how well isolating is it and that sort of thing. So I have a clip where I do a quick demo on how well it isolates sound that we'll get to in just a moment. But I think another reason why it's more just take it to a place where there's a little bit of ambient noise or maybe some people working around you and leave it there and use it there kind of a headphone is this carrying case, which is nice and all of that. I mean, it will protect the headphone fairly well. It's got a nice handle on it, but it's big. Like this is going to be your carry-on if you want to take it on an airplane, for example. So again, lug it to where you're going to use it, leave it there for a while, I really think is more the name of the game on this particular closed back. Here's one of the cables real quick that came with it. Okay, uses just like the Australis, uses 4-pin mini XLR connectors on there. And here's one of the cables that is like this flat ribbon style. It comes with standard, a 6-foot long, where they terminate it in 1/4-inch single-ended. They sent me for eval here a 4.4 millimeter Pentacon version of it, but we see that it is this flat ribbon style. It lays on a desk fairly nicely. It has the mini 4-pin XLR on the headphone end here. But as far as stock cables go, as I said with the Australis, like these are among the better stock cables that I have used. So they're really not a problem. They're not something you need to rush out and upgrade. If you do want to get aftermarket cables though, the mini XLR wiring scheme is the same as what Audeze, Meze, and ZMF use. So any cables that work with them, you can use with the Australis here just as well. Okay, let's do that sound isolation clip that I just mentioned, and then I'll come back on the other side and kind of describe what I think that means and how to interpret what we see in that clip. So let's check that out. Quick sound leak test here. I have the Australis plugged into my N6 Mark II DAP with EO2 module, and I have set the volume on this to play back at my critical listening level of about a 72-73 dB AV as judged by ear. I haven't put anything in there to actually measure it. I've just turned it up to where I usually like to do critical listening thing. So the first thing I will do here, the track that I've selected here is called The Dreaming City by Glass Hammer. I selected them because I don't think there will be any copyright issues by using that. I'm going to keep it to under 30 seconds, hopefully, of actually hearing the music so that I don't get sued or blocked. Anyway, I'll hold it open right by the microphone here on my chest for a little bit, let it play for a few seconds, then I'll close it, not push it closed, but just put the pads together until we get a seal. Then I'll open it up again and stick it back on my head, and we'll just see how it sounds from all of that. So, hanging open, here we go. False start, here we go. All right, let's see what that turned up. Right, to my ear there, the attenuation that we just heard when I closed that or had it on my head was okay, but not great. Like, it was definitely quieter than when I just left these out playing open, but it did not really... I've heard better attenuation, let's say, when it is closed here. I also should drop an anecdote here that I shared when I reviewed the Kennerton GH-40, the Yallerhorn GH-40, which I have out here for comparison here in a little bit. That the attenuation of ambient noise, so holding outside sounds out here, is also not great. I told a story about when I was listening to these out on my deck that I could hear a downy woodpecker pecking away at a tree pretty clearly through quieter passages of music anyway while I had these on, and that woodpecker being about a 40 to 50 foot direct line distance from my head from where it was in the nearby tree. And that bird cooperated and was pecking away at the tree long enough that I was able to switch onto these here and check the attenuation with some soft music playing there, and it's the same deal. Like these both held out that woodpecker sound at about the same and not particularly great way. So, summing that up in terms of the isolation, the sound isolation on these things, I think you will need to be a little bit careful. It's not going to block out a whole lot of external ambient noise. It will some, but not a ton. And I think you might need to be a little bit careful if you're planning on bringing these into a cubicle. You'll probably want to keep your volume low, else your cubicle neighbor will probably hear what's going on and that sort of thing. So just be careful about the situation you find yourself in. It will do a fairly good job of holding out fan noise. So if you are basically working alone in your office and you have like a loud computer case fan noise going on, this will block that fairly well more often than not. So just keep in mind what I've shown you here and what I've said about this if you are in the market for a closed back headphone and how well this isolates. All right, let's talk about other things. Okay. Now that we have gotten some looks at the build and I talked about use cases and done sound isolation and talked about how easy to drive these are, let's get into the sound and some comparisons with some similarly priced or slightly differently priced closed back headphones out there. All right, so test gear. I checked the drivability of this by trying the little Heatus S9 Pro dongle DAC, which I have reviewed recently, so I'll put a link down below to that. My KN-N6 Mark II DAP with the EO2 module, which was in the isolation demo that you saw a moment ago. I also played this on the Cord Hugo 2, and for critical listening on that a lot, and sourced that with its matching 2Go streamer, which would be connected via Wi-Fi to my Rune network, where I would play either local high-res or lossless FLAC files, local DSD files, or stream high-res or lossless FLAC from Qobuz. All right, then for desktop systems, it's got a fair amount of run on the combination of Gishelli J2S DAC with the Sparkos op amps, review pending, into the Late People G111 Mark II headphone amplifier, and then a couple of more scaling up kinds of systems. I used the Gustard R26 into the Headamp GSX Mini, and then my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC into the Vioelectric HPA V281 headphone amplifier. All of the desktop systems would have been sourced from Rune, playing the same types of files I just mentioned through the 2Go, only this time it would go through a Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer, which in turn was fed into a Singer SU6 DDC and then out to the various DACs by either AES, SPDIF, or I2S. All right, so that is all the test gear. What did all of that lead me to sound-wise? So the overall frequency response or perceptive frequency response here is still more neutral than it isn't. There are a couple of spots where it's maybe not quite neutral. I think there is just a little bit of a mid-bass shelf to it. The bass extension is pretty decent. It's not, set the world on fire good, but it's fairly strong. But I think most of the bass range is elevated over what many would consider neutral. But again, not by much, like somewhere between 2 and 4 dB through most of the places there. The mid-range as well, tonally balanced. It's a little bit smoother than even the Bori, I think. In terms of like the Borealis had a very noticeable 1.5 kilohertz peak in it. This one has a little bit of that, but it's not nearly as noticeable. So it's a little bit more even and smooth through the mid-range than the open back model was. But this one is not quite as bright. Like it does roll off in the treble a little bit more than most other headphones do. So to me, it doesn't quite rise to the level of dark, but it does tilt the overall like tonality a little bit more towards the warm end of the spectrum, I think. So again, on balance, it is more neutral than it is not, but it does tend towards warmth just a little bit because there is a bit of bass elevation, and then the treble and the air frequencies are rolled off just a little bit below what most would consider neutral here through most of the region. Now, that said, overall, the tonal balance is pretty good. There's generally pretty strong relationship, pretty strong natural and accurate relationship between fundamental tones and their harmonics and that sort of thing. And I just mentioned like the mid-range to me is a little bit more tonally balanced and smooth than even the open back Borealis model. So there is just a little hint of a hollowness coloration to the mid-range here, particularly with vocals, but not as pronounced as even the open back model was. So it was not enough to bother me when I was just sitting there listening to music. For the most part, I thought that the tonality was pretty neutral and pretty natural. And really, I was quite impressed with the tuning overall and how even the frequency response was for a closed-back headphone under $1,000, to the extent that one of the questions that I asked the Aurorus team was, what did you do for damping and controlling the back wave here inside the cup? And they honestly said they didn't do much. They taped some foam on the back of the inside of the cup. They put some cotton around the baffle. They did like one or two other simple things there, but they said there was not a whole lot of complexity. Like they didn't do a whole lot of like building a special geometry inside the cup, like any kind of a honeycomb or like any kind of thing like that going on, or making it a diffuser, as they basically just went the damping route. And to my ear, whatever they have done was pretty good, because they got pretty good control over the tonality and the frequency response for a closed back headphone. They're especially under $1,000. And they managed to do that without sacrificing any of the dynamic impact either. Like there's really very little to indicate that there's any kind of driver damping that comes from just the driver being forced to move into a pressurized chamber. Like I did not get the sense that the driver motion was restricted at all, which can happen in a closed back that is not fully vented. So if you've heard of, let's talk about speakers for a second so I can illustrate this point a little bit better. If you've heard of an acoustic suspension or a sealed box speaker, what happens is that the volume of air inside the box is a constant. So as the driver comes back, okay, so the driver moves out, as it comes back into the cabinet here, the back wave, because of that volume of air, it tries to compress that air a little bit, but then of course the air pushes back on there, and that does damp the driver's motion back into the cabinet a little bit more. And I really was not getting any kind of a sense sonically that was happening to this thing, because the dynamics were nice and punchy and snappy and all of that. So there's a good thump, there's a decent amount of slam, kick drums have a nice authoritative punch to them. Snare drums are nice and snappy and all of that. So there's still a dynamic and lively presentation going on with the sound here as well. So however they did that, sealing it up, but also just allowing enough, doing a combination of damping and allowing enough acoustic energy out to not restrict the driver motion, is well done and shows up with excellent dynamic performance. The resolution here is also pretty good. It's very resolving for a $900 headphone. I was getting a lot of room reverbs coming through clearly. The rosinousness, the zizzy sound of bows being dragged across strings were resolved well. The finger action of bass guitar string plucks and all of that came through very well, all that. So the resolution is quite appropriate there for the price point and the product type, I think. So you put those things together, I think, much like, oh, and then I should say that also the staging here, the sound stage, again, is quite wide and quite expansive. So the soundstage size, very wide. There's a little bit of depth, not a ton. That's not surprising for a closed back at this price. It's not wall of sound, but like there's not a ton to the depth dimension. There's a little bit of height, not a ton either. Again, that's fairly common for a closed back here in this price range. But the real impressive part about it is how wide the soundstage is. The imaging and the separation are also fairly strong. There's fairly decent coherence from left to right as you move across the sound field in terms of placing instruments. A decent, not stellar, but a decent job of putting space between sonic images as well. I will note here that the center image does seem a little bit more pronounced than some other headphones that I've heard. Not like that it's stuck forward, but just like the size of it. It seems just a little bit narrower than some other headphones that I've heard, even among closed backs. So the center image stands out a little bit more, and we lose a little bit of the coherence in center left and center right, but not bad. Okay, so it's noticeable, but for when you're really listening for it, but when you're just kicking back to listen to music, it really doesn't show up at all that I noticed or was distracted by. So putting all of those things together here, I think we have a similar set of strengths that the Borealis had in terms of sound, which should surprise no one since they're from the same company. And that is that we've got a very dynamic presentation, a very wide and large, expansive soundstage, like even for a closed back. Like I didn't even put even for a closed back in there as a qualifier. I think it just is a wide soundstage. And then we have that really good resolution to go along with it. And then here, what I was particularly impressed with was the evenness of the frequency response. Like they got pretty good control over the tonality of this thing. And that is very impressive to add on top of those traits that I just mentioned sonically. So as a sonic package, it is very, very strong. I was really quite impressed with the performance, the sonic performance we were able to get out of this thing as a closed back for $900. And so to help explain a little bit why I was so impressed with that, let's look at some comparisons. Because I just recently reviewed the Kennerton GH-40, which is about $750, $800 US, right around in there right now. My review for that will be, a link for it will be down in the description. And this was also a fun headphone. This one's actually even easier to drive yet than the Australis, but they're already both easy to drive. This one's just very, very easy to drive. This one is a little bit narrower and more intimate in its staging. Its tonality is a little bit more mid-forward on it. I think it is a little bit brighter, has a little bit more treble energy. The resolution difference between these two is slim to none, if there is any. The dynamic impact is about even, between the two. This one has a little bit more mid-range forwardness, though. A little bit more mid-range energy comes out, which does give it a little bit more of a hollow timbre and tonality than the Australis has. So some people, and so that also makes vocals stand out a little bit more and be a little bit more noticeable yet than they are on the Australis. So some people may prefer that presentation. But I also mentioned here when I did this review that the dynamic range on the GH-40 is a little bit more compressed. Specifically, quieter sounds sound like they are brought up in level just a little bit so that the dynamic range, the difference, the magnitude of the difference in perceived loudness between loud sounds and quiet sounds is brought down a little bit. Not because the top end is quieter, but because the bottom end is louder, where the Australis has a lot more natural dynamic range presentation to it, I think, than the Kennerton does. But these are both really good closed back options here in that $800 to $1,000 price category. They do not sound the same, and so there will be some preference things going on. I think the Kennerton fits a little bit better on my head, stays in place better on my head and all of that. So like there are both some ergonomic and sonic pros and cons to both, that it'll just be a matter of listener preference, which one you prefer. Which one do I prefer? Like sonically, I think the Australis is the more complete and more refined package and the more natural sounding headphone of these two, but I do prefer the way the Yallerhorn fits and stays on my head. Like it was a little bit more comfortable for me to use like while moving around, which is an advantage for a closed back headphone. And I think this also isolates a little bit better in terms of holding music sounds in. They're about even in terms of how well they hold ambient sounds out, but in terms of holding music sounds in, this one does a little bit better job of that. Okay, the other comparison I'll make here is with my still favorite closed back, my reference closed back, and that is the Focal Radiance, which is $1,300. So it is nearly half again more expensive than the Australis is. So like everything that I say here about this comparison should be with that difference in price kept in mind. Now, the Radiance is more isolating. It holds ambient sounds out better. It seals music sounds in better. I can't do the push together test on this one because Focals are can spreaders, right? They don't go together. But like when it's on my head and all of that, like it holds music sounds in better. It also fits more snugly on my head, and so like I can move around and use it on the go. I can look down on my desk. It doesn't feel like it's going to slide off of my head and that sort of thing. So in terms of being a closed back headphone, the Radiance is still a little bit better and like expands into more use cases where you might want to consider using a closed back because of the better isolation, the slightly tighter fit that is still comfortable, stays on the head better. Like it can be an actual OTG closed back rather than a go sit at a desk somewhere where there's a little bit of ambient noise or people around you kind of closed back. So it can be used in that latter scenario, but it's more OTG friendly than the Australis is. So that opens the door to more use cases you may consider using a closed back. Now, sonically, the Radiance is also an upgrade. It has even more of a bass shelf, which I personally like, but that's a matter of preference. These two are about even in terms of their dynamic presentation. I would say, if anything, there's maybe a slight edge to the bass dynamics in particular in the Radiance, where the mid-range dynamics might be a little bit snappier on the Australis. Okay, but they are pretty close overall in terms of that presentation. Where the Radiance pulls ahead, I think, is that it is more resolving yet, and that comes out in a couple of ways. For one thing, like room reverbs in particular are a little bit more defined, and you can tell where they are coming from a little bit better than you can on the Australis. Okay, and the spatial separation is a little bit stronger on the Radiance than the Australis. So there's a better sense of like not only where is an instrument placed in the sound field, but like that there is space around it. Okay, and that's even more true in the depth dimension. So it is more three-dimensional and holographic in its spatial presentation. The Australis might have a little bit wider soundstage on it as well, but not by much, might be just a little bit, where the Radiance is going to have more depth and height to it though. And the pronounced center image that I talked about on the Australis here is not quite as bad on the Radiance, right? Like the Radiance still has a nice clear sonic image, but it's just more coherent to either side, and it doesn't sound as stand outy or as like attention grabbing as the center image is on the Australis. And so you just get a more coherent, more three-dimensional sound field, all that. And plus it has a more natural tonality, which leads to a more lush and natural timbre through the mid-range and the treble than the Australis does as well. But again, this one is $400 more than the Australis is, so we would expect that it outperforms the Australis, and it does. But does it do it disproportionately to the price? And I'm going to say no. I think that at $900 US, what this does as a closed back headphone is quite impressive. Like, so we'll wrap up this review here and say that I actually really enjoyed and really liked this headphone, and that it became arguably more impressive and compelling a product to me than even the Borealis, just because of all that it does well, and doing it as a closed back here in this price range. Like, that doesn't happen all the time. So if you are in the market for a somewhat warm-ish, if you're treble sensitive, okay, if you work in an environment where you need a headphone that will do an okay job of holding ambient sound in, you're not going to bother your cubicle neighbor or whatever, but you still kind of need to hear what's going on around you and all of that. And again, you're not going to be doing OTG use. You're going to take this somewhere and you're going to use it there. The Australis is a really, really solid option. I really enjoyed listening to it, even just as a headphone to have around for critical listening. If you don't need an open back, if you just prefer closed back, it's a pretty solid option there. So a big thank you to the folks at Aurorus for sending over the Australis and the Borealis. I really enjoyed them both. I look forward to what this company has to offer going forward, because I've been rather impressed with both of their headphones so far. So good job, well done. So I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the Aurorus Australis closed back headphone. Please remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Leave a like on this video if you haven't. Comment down below. Let me know what you think on this headphone. And please check out my PayPal and my Patreon so that you can help support this channel and I can help bring more content like this to you, because I'm not keeping this headphone and I don't really get paid to do this job other than what I get through YouTube ad revenue, affiliate links, and that PayPal and that Patreon. So help me out, help me keep this going, and as always, enjoy the music.